I have a Deutschland-Ticket, which means that without needing to pay any extra, I can use public transport to get from my home to, for example, Frankfurt.
And now that I'm in, for example, Frankfurt, I can go anywhere I want on local public transport, whether it's bus, tram, U-Bahn or S-Bahn. Or if I decide that Frankfurt isn't for me after all, I can hop on a regional train and go somewhere else, like Marburg or Heidelberg or Koblenz.
In fact, I can go anywhere in Germany, which is how it was that some of you saw me riding the trams in Bremen a couple of months ago.
So here's how this works. Normally, local public transport tickets are issued by local public transport associations and operators. If you're in Berlin, local public transport is organized by the VBB. If you're in Cologne, it's the VRS, and if you're in Frankfurt, it's the RMV. On the face of it, it makes sense that local infrastructure is administered locally. But because each region has its own rules, the ticketing systems don't work the same everywhere. It gets even more complicated when you have to cross a boundary into some other area. For example, where I live is just about within commuting distance of Frankfurt, but that's in a different region. There is an agreement in place between the two transport associations that will allow you to buy a special transitional ticket, but that's expensive. The Deutschland-Ticket makes life a lot easier. One ticket is valid on all forms of local public transport everywhere in Germany. No matter where you are, you can just hop on public transport, and yes, that includes the Wuppertal Suspended Railway. You can also use any of these types of train and even a handful of long-distance trains, although not most of them.
And the big advantage of this ticket, of course, is that if you're travelling around Germany, you don't have to learn a completely new tariff system in every city that you visit. So it seems like it would be the perfect deal for tourists. But is it?
Well, it can be. That depends on a couple of factors, but what you have to bear in mind is that it's not actually for short-term visitors. It's intended for long-term residents.
It is a subscription-based digital ticket that auto-renews every calendar month until you cancel it. And this is the trap that I've seen a lot of tourists fall into, because the cancellation terms are not always tourist-friendly. The Deutschland-Ticket is offered for sale by many different resellers, most of them transport associations and operators. And most of them have the kind of cancellation policy that Germans find pretty normal, but which everybody else finds very confusing. If you want your subscription to end at the end of the month, you have to cancel at the latest by the 10th day. If you miss that deadline, your subscription will auto-renew for another month. I've seen people who didn't understand the terms being made to pay twice what they expected.
In some cases, this can lead to people being sent demands and threats of legal action. It might feel like a scam, but these terms are clearly laid out and quite normal, and a court is not likely to take your side on this.
Now obviously the problem with this ticket is that it's not designed with tourists in mind, but tourists were inevitably going to want to take advantage of it. Now one solution would be to have a version of this ticket for tourists to use, perhaps one that's only valid for a week or for 2 weeks. But I think there's probably a simpler solution, and I'm going to phrase this as a question. Why, in this day and age, does it take 3 weeks to process a cancellation?
And it's a fair question, because it doesn't have to be that way. And I know that because it isn't always that way.
Now, I have not tried this out myself, and I am not being paid to endorse this. But there is a company called Mopler that offers the Deutschland-Ticket under much more favourable terms. It has 2 interesting options. You can choose to pause the ticket temporarily so that you don't have to pay for months that you don't actually use it, and you can cancel it completely as late as 24 hours before the end of the month. So if this little startup can manage it, why can't a far bigger company like Deutsche Bahn with its annual turnover of 40 or 50 billion euros? I think it is fair to point out that the Deutschland-Ticket is still relatively new and still being evaluated. My hope is that it represents the first step towards a comprehensive reform of the way that public transport in Germany is organized and financed. But that might prove to be quite difficult. Any attempt by the federal government to take on responsibilities delegated to the states is always fiercely resisted. But I can make one prediction. The Deutschland-Ticket has resulted in operators losing revenue, and some of them have been getting into financial difficulties. So expect the price to go up in the near future.